We are back again with our meet and greet series. I'm Lindsay, your resident blonde butcher, and I'm so excited about my conversation today with Lacey Alexander. Lacey works as an animal welfare lead for beef at Cargill Protein North America. Her expertise and knowledge about beef quality assurance and the role of animal welfare and handling in the beef industry is our focus today. And let's face it, it's a hot topic. Cargill is one of the largest beef processors in North America. They work closely with beef animal welfare experts, including world renowned Dr. Temple Grandin, a past guest on episode 1 of the Keeping It Rural podcast. Also, Dr. Lily Edwards Calloway and the team of graduate assistants of Colorado State University. Cargill also prides itself on working with supplies to ensure livestock are properly cared for and handled prior to harvest. Lacey, welcome to the Keeping It Rural Network podcast. I have like the $1,000,000 question I have to ask you because it's one I get asked all the time. And it is, how did you end up in this position?
I lost a series of bets and right. I went to school just like most animal science graduates did, thinking that I wanted to be a veterinarian. Did not happen. I ran out of money and patience. I went to work for Cargill Pork in Ottumwa, Iowa. I worked on the slaughter floor for a couple years on second shift, moved my way out into the yards, and then moved my way into being a hog buyer. I bought hogs in Kelowna, Iowa. That is the largest Mennonite Amish settlement on the west side of the Mississippi. As you can imagine, being about 25 years old with a nose ring, female, and multicolored hair.
In
Like
Iowa, right? In
Iowa,
Iowa.
with mostly Amish and Mennonites being my customers, with a female hog buyer. That was pretty tough. Anyhow, maybe that's for another podcast.
I told everybody this might be a multi-series podcast. You and I got a lot of stuff.
Nonetheless, I bought hogs for a couple years and then transitioned back into the plant life where I did some animal welfare. And then I was asked to split my time between pork and beef. And at that point, I split my time between pork and beef. And then we sold our pork business. And then I became beef's problem 100% of the time. And so I've done a little bit of everything. And that's how I ended up here in the beef world.
Yeah, that is awesome. So did you end up going back to college for meat science? Or did you just
No,
work your way through the trade?
I just worked my way through.
But you're the same as me. So talk about the position you're in and what your day looks like.
My day is different every single day. Today I worked from home. And that meant that I got up and I checked my email, sent out some data to the plants. I was a couple weeks behind because I had been on the road. And so I sent out some data to the plants about some of their performance on stunning accuracy,
Yeah.
stunning performance at the knock box, their electric prod use. And that's all information that gets sent to me by a third party auditing company. It's remote video auditing. And so I get all that information and I put it in a pretty little package for the plants to be able to look at. And then, gosh, I started cussing and discussing with a customer about how they're going to get a 55 passenger tour bus into our Fort Morgan, Colorado plant and deliver sandwiches. And we are talking about gathering data for our ESG report. So I started crunching some numbers and asking some of our stats folks to get me some slaughter data from the past couple of years so I can start putting some of that information together for our sustainability report. So it's different all the
Wow.
time. I was in Dodge City, Kansas. I was with the Cowboys out there. We have a new manager out in the yards, kind of walking through some of the processes. He's got a lot of
Yeah.
really cool ideas, meat ideas. He's completely new to beef, not beef. He's been out on the floor his entire life, and now he's out in the yard. And so, brand new set of eyes. He wants to do good. He wants to shake things up. So, it was 150 degrees out there and sunny and humid, and it was terrible, but fun. My day, my week, it's always different.
Which is so awesome. So, can we like backtrack when you talk about monitoring the harvest floors? These videos, people are actually watching the knock box and people working the live cattle outside, and then they're reporting what they see. in a package to you, and
Yeah.
then you go through and audit that. You know, if one animal got worked too much or I mean, we all know animals are imperfect as are
Mhm.
humans, but we all know there can always be that one animal, and you can't blame them. I don't blame them, but they definitely require a different set of handling. And then as well as what breed are you working on? If we get into the Akahushi or the dairy cattle or, they're all a different demeanor and mentality. So I find that really interesting that you watch that. And then what does that management phase look like? You call the plant and you're like, hey, so I saw this. Let's have a chat.
Sometimes the plants generally, and when I say generally, probably 99% of the time, watch their P's and Q's and toe the line. And like you say, sometimes we have some bad actors, whether it's the livestock or the human being. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning wanting to do bad. I think
Agree.
sometimes people just get frustrated or perhaps even find that shortcut that ends up being disastrous. And so if I do a spot check and see something that, hey, someone's going to get hurt or that this could be seen by a different set of eyes in a different way and that we need to correct this behavior before it becomes a habit, then yeah, I'll pick up my phone and start calling folks. Or the unfortunate thing is I have everybody's cell phone number and I'll send out text messages and I'll give timestamps of video that I just watched. And yeah, it is what it is. To be quite honest with you, it's taken me 8 years to develop relationships with the folks, the plants, to be able to give corrective feedback and understanding that I am here to help and not
Yeah.
to destroy lives, and that
Yeah.
I am here to help you keep blood on the floor. I am here to help you do right. And
Right.
even though I may be the annoying little sister you wish you never had, here I am,
Right.
kid.
And I think I hate the word slaughter. Like it makes me cringe. And, when we have harvest days, which if you saw me from the waist down right now, I just came off our harvest floor and ran over here and threw some makeup on quick, but and dry shampoo. So don't look too close to my hair. I feel like a perception of somebody who has never been exposed to harvesting an animal versus somebody who has been exposed, the perception is very, very different to the accuracy of the reality of it. So when we talk about that, can you go into a little bit more of what Cargill's beef system is as a whole? And what does that footprint look like?
So we have 8 plants in North America, 2 in Canada, so 1 in Alberta and 1 in Ontario. Our coastal plants, which would be in Wyalusing, Pennsylvania, and in Fresno, California, are primarily cow plants. Those are your dairy cows that we slaughter there. I'm gonna use that word slaughter because it is what it is.
It- yes, I hear you. I hear you.
And then our retired dairy cows and fed cattle. And in the Midwest, basically, are our fed plants. And that's in Schuyler, Nebraska, Fort Morgan, Colorado, Brianna, Texas. Which one am I forgetting? Dodge City, Kansas. I was getting from there.
Yes,
Wow, I'm
that's
forgetting that. We have a pretty large footprint. We are the largest ground beef processor in the world.
wow.
We are number 3, I believe, in numbers in terms of animals harvested. Pretty large there. We have a pretty big footprint when it comes to cattle. We do a lot of turkey. We do some chicken. I have a global chicken processing, some eggs. A lot of the eggs that you eat at McDonald's, the liquid eggs, those are Cargill eggs. So we have protein everywhere.
It's a diversified protein. It's not
Yep.
just beef. For killing pigs.
Yeah, so we used to have 2 pig plants, but, we sold those here about 5, 6 years ago to JBS. We're no longer slaughtering pigs, but we do and we also raise pigs too. We had our own sows, and so we sold that entire kit and caboodle to JBS, and so now we do, process pork product.
They got their fingers in a little bit of everything from on the
Mhm.
hoof to the grocery store.
Oh, yeah, and I salts and ingredients and sauces, and it's crazy.
All of the above, whatever goes with the protein, right?
When people ask me, "Hey, do you know that one guy that works at Cargill?" Like, no,
Not
I sure don't.
How many are you guys harvesting a day for cattle? That one of your beef plants? Would you say it's 1,500 a day?
No, that would be like a
Think it's
cow
more.
plant. Yeah. The retired cows would be a 12 to 15. Your fluffier, your bigger boned cows would be probably right around a 5,000 a day. That's on my 2 shifts.
Oh, just to compare, I kill 10 a week.
Yeah. So I think the most you can get inspected an hour is 390. And there's
Oh.
plants amongst us that can hit that 390. And if we could get more inspected, I'm sure they could do more than that.
Dr. Temple Grandin was actually one of my visiting professors in college. And when we started this podcast, I had reached out to her, not thinking she would remember me, but she remembered, teaching in that era, I should say. It's been a
Mhm.
while. She was really fun to talk to, and she made some really interesting comments. When we started asking her, when did the more focused work on animal welfare begin and how has it evolved throughout the years? I would like to know your view and, comparable to what her view was. And her response was in the 70s, it was bad. And the welfare, she said it was horrible, but so were the slaughter plants, especially when we talk about food safety and things like that. And even she would say, too, we've come tenfold from when she first started her research. I mean, you worked your way up through the ranks. So it's not like you just came into this position. You've been there and seen it and done it. What have you seen in your opinion?
I think we have started to spend more time on auditing. You can't make better what you don't audit if you don't know it's there. We are starting to get to the finer details, the larger plants that have the infrastructure. So the Lacey's to be able to help fine tune some of those crunchy parts of
Yeah.
our industry to be able
Well,
to polish up a little bit more.
and sometimes I feel like that's just the industry. Some of it I feel like is really hard to change because it is animal handling and we call it cowboying for a reason.
Mhm.
And I've toured JBS, I've toured a couple other packers, and I think they do a phenomenal job.
Mhm.
For the 10 I do a week and I get all the personalities of cattle that come in,
Right.
Uh, and I think you handle it accordingly. But for what I have seen for, whether it's the 1,500 coming in for the day, it's just amazing how they work them and handle them and how silent it is. What do you see are the biggest things that we still need to polish on?
People safety. I think we have focused a lot on the animals, and there's still opportunity areas surrounding animal welfare, but we still need to pay attention and we need to pay more attention to the people
Yeah.
welfare. I mean, let's face it, it's hot when it's hot and it's cold when it's cold. If we take most of those open air lairage pens, when it's snowing, those folks are getting snowed on. Raining, they're getting rained on. And that chain is still running. Those cattle, fat cattle today are 1,500 pounds. A lot of those cattle have only been worked on a horse. And now all of a sudden, they're in a pen next to their buddies, pretty close quarters, and they're in a brand new area. They've had a terrible day to begin with, right?
Right. Yep.
They've had a terrible day. They're a little agitated to begin with. And now we're putting people inside of those pens who did not grow up like you and me. And so they don't have that natural livestock instinct. We are getting folks who've never been around livestock before and are putting them in those pens and running those cattle. Gosh, we need to pay more attention to people and people's safety. And so a lot of the work that I'm personally focused on now at Cargill is how can we make the lives of the cattle better? Well, I have them for those few hours, but make
Yeah.
the entire day better for the cowboy and the cattle. Like, how do I make sure they go home in the same condition in which they arrived? How do I make sure they want to come back to work? How do I stay competitive? Because they smell like poop, they're hot, they're sweaty. At any moment, one of those animals can turn around on them.
Their
There's
horse looks
no
like a
winning.
bad day.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a really great comment. We toured some of the feedlots. I was really, really impressed. And it was funny being a northern girl in the meat industry. The cowboys down there cornered me right away because we have this huge influx of beef on dairy now. And it's been
Yep.
great for the dairy industry. It's been extremely challenging for people like you and me in the slaughter industry. And their first question to me was, how do you handle these cattle? They're like dogs in your back pocket. I can't work them
Yep.
on a horse. I can't work them with a dog, a four wheeler. So they're on foot with these beef on dairy cattle, walking them miles through the feed yard. This is the only way to handle them. You
Mhm.
know, so I think that makes a really great comment, what these cowboys are dealing with and all the different diversities of breeds, and then now you start throwing in the crosses with the Akahushis and the Wagyu breed, and those suckers can jump 13, 14 feet if they want to. They're a great animal to eat. They're not the most fun to work.
Yeah, kinda like
Nope.
that mean old cow that gets cold. But if you start thinking about it logistically, you, the rancher, cold her because she's mean and you don't wanna get hurt. So you dropped her off at the sale barn, and so you put all of those folks in danger,
Right.
and then she gets bought and traded however many times, and then she's shipped off to a plant. And she doesn't get a sticker on her back that says, "Watch out," right? I spend a lot of time talking about 1,500-pound fat animals that have had a really bad day, but that cool cow that has a poor disposition, that's been traded a couple times and ends up at a packing plant that's not labeled, she is the one to watch out for. She is the one that's gonna come and get you. I don't know how to address that.
That's where I go back when I label things called cowboying. I mean, that's where your wordsmanship comes in, your internal instinct, having a good, strong backed horse, has some cutting disposition or cowbred in him that could take on this cow if they really wanted to. That's the part that you can't take the West out of that story. It's just kind of the reality of it. I have a rope horse sometimes I bring to my locker just to stand outside the gate to cool their jets and make them feel some form of dominance that's not coming from a human, but from another species. Gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. Would you like walk us forward from the cowboys in the tubs and holding pens all the way up to, the knockbox and what that looks like? Because I don't
Yep,
think a lot of people know how cool it is.
yep. From the crowd pen, they'll go into a single file serpentine, and from that serpentine, they'll end up going into a restrainer. And the restrainer and knockbox are kind of melded together into one piece of equipment. So that restrainer takes them down a slide and separates their legs and kind of puts them on a little conveyor. And it encloses them really tightly, not like squishing them, but tightly. And that is mimicked off of Temple Grandin's theory, saying that the animals want to be held tightly in an enclosed space to feel safe. And that animal is taken from that enclosed space into what we call the knock box. And that knock box is where an employee is standing there with a pneumatic gun. And that pneumatic gun is hooked into house powered air. And our pneumatic guns are about 190 psi. So that's pretty tough, right?
Yeah.
190 psi, and he will aim at the forehead about an inch above the brain, about an inch above center, and he'll apply that first knock. It gives a concussion. So that concussion knocks the animal out, and milliseconds later, the bolt will enter through the skull and into the brain, causing irreversible brain destruction. First, it's knocked out. It's insensible to pain, meaning it can't feel anything from there on out. And milliseconds later, that will enter the brain, making sure that it stays out, that it remains out, that it can't come back. And so we'll actually knock them 2 times. So that first one, according to regulation, has to render the animal insensible. And we'll follow up with a security knock to ensure that it works, right?
On the insurance shop.
Yep, absolutely. And
Very
so
cool.
then that animal is shackled. So there's a guy standing underneath that entire system. They're on a shackle on a leg, and then the animal's hoisted, and then it's blood.
And then does he kinda stay in that carousel till they bleed, and then they move down the line from there, correct?
Yeah, there'll be a handful of cattle that will be shackled and hoisted, and then they are waiting right until they get bled. There will be a guy there opening up the hide, and then another one that will stick, and then they will stay on the chain all together, and they'll go through some intervention processes after that to get some of the dirt and junk off of their hides prior to opening up any more of their legs and stuff to ensure food safety.
And I'm sure that depends on what season we're in.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like in those worst case scenarios, you guys have to report them. Obviously, they're being audited. Some of those incidents are just the nature of the industry, period. You were talking about Cargill and their policies with the knockbox. When they're coming up to it, they're really not even moving. So they don't need anybody to be whistling at them or working them through the alley. The alley eventually just robotically moves them, correct? At the last half.
Right. Yeah, in the restrainer, there's no human interaction inside the restrainers. We'll help them sometimes into the restrainer, but once they're fully inside that restrainer, they're taken into the knock box. So there's no human interaction, and it's probably 2 to 3 seconds. It's not zooming, but it's
Yeah.
really not that a lot of time from the entrance into the restrainer to go into the knock box. It's all a very quick process. One, it's probably an uncomfortable process no matter how much we try to make it comfortable. It's
Right.
all new, it's all novel, so we try to make it as quick as humanly possible. So
Yeah.
we send them through that, and yeah, there's nobody in there with them.
Yeah. And I thought that was so cool. I mean, even when I've seen it on video, it's very quiet. Like nobody's bellowing it, which is what a kill day should be in my book. Don't get me wrong, there's instances where you have a very vocal one that they are just vocal on their
Oh, yeah.
own. You know, they're more social, more like a pig where they're super social. But yeah, I mean, I'm always amazed with that amount of cattle that every branding I've been to, every prig checking day, they're so much more vocal. It's planned and their senses should be heightened, but they're just so
Mhm.
chill. They're
Yep.
so chill, which is amazing. And I feel like that's a story that really needs to be told more, but we also talking about this part of the process. Like everybody just wants to get their meat at the store and not think about the other side of it. But the handling is so incredible as to where we're at,
Yep.
compared to what we used to be. Can we talk about kind of like the cruddier side of things? Like today I had a blind one come in. I handle my disabled ones, maybe that's the technical term, differently than I do my ones that can see. We sorted her out in the trailer and then we harvest her in the trailer. I didn't try to make her work anything or go anywhere, just boom right there, and then we wenched her out.
Mhm.
Simple. What do you do in those scenarios when, let's say, one slips outside? You're in the middle of a snowstorm and you've got 5,000 head or 1,200 head. One goes down, busts a leg, maybe tears its suspensories and can't keep its hind legs together if they're Holsteins. They're notorious for that. What do you do in those scenarios?
So if they cannot ambulate to the knock box on their own accord, they must be euthanized. And then they cannot be used for human food. They are used for food, but it's pet food, probably. They have to go to rendering. Ones that are blind will likely be suspected by the USDA, and that's up to them whether or not we will slaughter it or condemn it. things along those lines. Problematic animals will be euthanized.
They will be.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yep. Yep. So we can't harvest any of the broken legs, any of the displaced hips. It's the pain and suffering part of it, unnecessary pain and suffering. Your prolapses, open wounds, things along those lines. Sometimes we'll make that call and condemn it on our own and euthanize it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the USDA, the vet will come out, they'll suspect it or condemn it themselves. An injured animal will not pass federal inspection.
Yeah. So you guys basically they're recycled into dog food.
They all have to walk and talk into that nut box.
Yeah. What should consumers know about meat processing to help understand more about the harvesting process, in your opinion?
I'm eating it too.
That's excellent. That is excellent. I always say that too.
I'm not putting any worms or nasty. I'm not doing anything. Gosh, I look at an animal and I think, man, he looks delicious. And so I I'm willing to feed it to my friends and my family. I put it in my own belly and I trust it. I cook it to temp, etc. I handle it. I wash my hands and I handle it correctly. I read the label date. I follow all of the things that were taught in food science class in grade school. Goodness, I'm eating it too, and
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of scary stuff that you find out there that makes you think, "Gosh, why would I put that in my mouth?" But it's safe to eat, and it's good to eat, and it's really tasty.
Yeah. I guess people just don't want to talk about it or really want to know. And I feel like there's such a disconnect now with, them not having its deer hanging in the tree like our grandparents did, or I'm the last generation that butchered chickens with grandma or something. So I feel like people are craving the story, but then they're a little shocked by the story. We have a smaller scale slaughter plant next to us here, and they primarily do buffalo, but they trade their shooters out every, is it 2 or 3 years for mental health reasons? Like, their shooter up there is not one I would wanna meet in a dark alley. He's very stoic, does not wanna speak English because the animals don't speak English. He's very, very talented at what he does, but yeah, I wouldn't wanna cross him. He's their head shooter, and I think he's been there 30 years doing
Yep.
it. But JBS had made a comment when I toured them that they had certain timelines on their knockers for mental health reasons.
Yeah. So we don't. Cargill doesn't.
You just allow the employee to request or ask or
Yeah, so if they're uncomfortable, sure. If you don't like what you're doing, that knock box is a pretty important part of our process. And if you are uncomfortable and if you are not quite digging it, sure, there's a place for you. And it might not be the knock box. It does take a special person to be able to do that, specifically once you understand what is happening. At the same time, it is also very important to understand that that knocker with that captive bolt gun isn't technically killing the animal. They're rendering them insensible. And to be able to explain that to them, that makes a world of difference. The death actually happens at exsanguination, right? At bloodletting, right?
beef would still be considered to have a heartbeat, correct? A mild heartbeat.
No, that heart will technically still be beating. I've read research probably 7 to 8 minutes after being capped at bolts done.
The evisceration and the bleeding out then would cause the heart to go into tachycardia, VSAB, and eventually
Right.
right.
That's basically, it's just going to run out of oxygen because of the bloodlet.
Yeah. So we don't have that possibility of one standing up on the
Yep.
floor. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's awesome. So we use, just for the listeners to know, we lose high velocity 22, a long rifle 22,
Mhm.
unless we're harvesting, bulls or retired cattle who might have a thicker bone density. Does that matter, the bone density and the age for you guys, or is the PSI and caliber that you're using enough for really any thickness of bone?
With bulls, there's also again, I could go into great detail. Bulls have a fat pad right where we
Yes,
shoot them,
yes.
a really thick hide, and I'm assuming it's to defend his girls in the wild, right?
Yep.
And so I always tell the fiance, but you don't have a thick skull, you just have a fat head. The bone thickness really isn't that much different between bull, cow, and fed animal. And I've cut them all apart and I have measured them. There's really not that much difference between all of the above. With that being said, because of that fat pad, we will use a heavy duty captive bolt gun from Jarvis on the bulls for the first stun and then follow up with the pneumatic.
And the pneumatic is the air portion, correct?
Right. And then the handheld captive bolt is the handheld with the length.
So you were talking about some of the creepy facts with the knockbacks. What do you got?
I think I've got some of the coolest mama jamas on the planet knocking cattle. They are just real relaxed and real cool.
They're the best. Just like chill and calm and
Oh, this one guy, he's got the coolest tattoos. And I mean, he'll just tell me, Lacey, where do you need that hole? Because I'll throw it wherever you need it. And that guy is knocking at a high speed plant and he is cool. He's lunch by himself. My goodness, he's a cool, cool guy. And, I'll show him some of the stuff, the research that we're doing with CSU or some of the things I'm thinking about doing. And he
yeah.
gets super about it and excited. And yeah, my own creepy factor is that probably one of the most relaxing places in the plant is at that knock box with a good knocker and is watching him.
What is that? That's the part I wish people would know. The energy in that moment and the calmness, and that's how it's supposed to be. I mean, that is like prime kill day when everything's silent. And I'm wondering if they even got one in the chute, because then all of a sudden I hear the gun go off and I'm like, oh my gosh, we had a really great day today. It was chill. And I'm sure as you guys are very, very picky about my shooter, my husband's a great shot, but he's also an excellent hunter. Got the patience and the chill and like I love those
Yep.
hunter boys. Nothing rattles them. They can have one snorting at them and reacting to them, and they are just cool as a cucumber. And
I, on the other hand, have not been built to be a knocker. I am 5'2". I don't have the arm span or the leg span. I would literally have to be in the box with the animal.
oh,
And
no.
obviously that would be dangerous. And so I'm not built and I'm so jealous.
What size are the people?
They're all sizes. And so it's unfair for me to say that I'm not built like one because there are slighter built individuals doing it.
Mhm.
But those taller, lanky guys, those football player looking guys, they make it look easy.
How many women knockers do you have?
I don't think any women have applied. We've had a few females that have been on the sticking stand
Yeah.
and several working in the yards. And we have a gal that runs the yards. She's a supervisor. She's in charge of everything. As long as I've been with Cargill Beef, I've never
See one?
had the opportunity to work with a female knocker. And as soon as I find one, whatever award I can nominate her for, I'll do it.
It's funny. I've gotten a lot of media since 2020, and I find it really funny because what I do is just what I do, and I've been doing it for 11 years. It's not I'm a woman, hear me roar, and I know I'm different and I don't look like your typical butcher. until you look at all my wrinkles or maybe compare the picture from when I started to now, you'd be like, "Oh."
Mm.
And I always laugh because I feel like there are so many women in the industry, in the plant, especially like JBS. If we got to the basement, that was where you saw the women working on the organs, maybe harvesting the cheek meat, spraying out the intestines for shipping, cutting tongues out of the skull, or maybe on the evisceration table where they're sorting livers out and cutting the gallbladders off. I see them playing a huge factor in those portions of the plant. Would you agree with that with Cargill, where you would see them mostly?
Yeah, we do actually have a lot in management positions as well. In terms of
Sure.
hourly workers, you're right. Right where you pointed out, that's where you would find more female participation. We have a couple general managers that are female. They oversee entire plants and complexes. I think Cargill does a really good job of promoting women and people of color, things along those lines. A lot of good opportunity for people like you and me within Cargill.
Okay, so I want to kind of jump over a little bit and talk about Cargill's influence on other countries and how they have helped with the humane handling and sharing some of the tactics and the trades here in the US. And I want to start with China. It's a hot topic country, but Cargill has done a lot with China in not only exports and imports, but as far as teaching more of what the US standards are in humane handling.
So we are participating currently with NAMI and their PACT program. And we are currently supporting that in terms of giving some of our data into that, that will help determine some of the best practices and standards that can be a part if China decides to accept some of those into their animal welfare, quote unquote, culture. To speak more specifically about our chicken and things along those lines, I can't because if it's got a feather, I don't touch it unless it's on my plate.
Yeah, you're a beef girl. So when we talk about NAMI, we talk about North American Meat Institute, and they are a privately owned company with a big footprint in Washington. And they do a lot of kind of that coordinating with other countries and working with imports and exports, correct?
Mhm.
So is there other countries that Cargill does a lot more with?
We're the largest beef processor in Canada. So we obviously have a large footprint and do a lot with the CFIA and the different organizations and industry organizations, specifically with beef within the country of Canada. We do have a joint venture in Australia with Tees. That is a beef slaughter there. So they raise and slaughter cattle there. I don't work a heck of a lot with the Australian stuff, but I think I'm about a quarter Canadian by now, as much as we've been doing with Canada.
Nice, nice. You got to claim it by now. I wanted to ask you about beef on dairy and what transitions you've had to make. You have your retired dairy plants that are harvesting cull cows, but you get into these Canadian Holstein. And I mean, these girls, they're big. I mean, they can have 8, 9 foot backs on them. I struggle with them in my plant. I mean, I'm in the middle of dairy, beef, pig, turkey land here, where a lot of other lockers are not, especially more south you get. What are some of the implementations you've had to do with this new introduced beef on dairy and the size of these animals? I mean, one will hang in my locker at 13 to 1400 pounds.
They are large and they still have their mom's personality. It takes a little bit more patience to get them moved within our system. It sometimes takes a little bit more patience and more hands on deck, moving them in smaller groups up into, the drive alley, into the crowd pit. In terms of them being too big to slaughter, I'm assuming you're talking about maybe chucks touching the ground. And we have to talk about a behemoth animal. I would also like to remind you that our Fresno and Wyalusing plants are retired villages, also kill bulls of all types and sizes and kinds. If I can fit a bull in that restrainer, in that knockbox,
Yep.
I'm going to be able to get your dairy cross in there too.
You're a big girl in there. Then do you guys do anything with halal, the religious slaughtering of cattle?
We in Guelph do modified halal. And what that is they go through the exact same process as the rest of our cattle. It's just the cut is different on the throat. The cut is different, but they are shot and cut. So it's a modified.
When you say modified, if you don't mind me asking, traditionally in Minnesota, the steel arm comes up, picks the animal's head up to stretch it out. They are cut, blessed by the
Mhm.
rabbi, cut, and then they're shot immediately. So when you talk modified, you're actually knocking them unconscious first, and then they're cutting the throat.
You've been through JBS, right? It's the exact same. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference unless you're watching the guy cut the throat. The process is they go through the knock box just like any other animal. So they're
Yep.
knocked unconscious. The only difference is the physical way that their throat is cut. That is our modified halal.
I love that.
And we prove that the heart is still beating
And that equals the religious.
the death. Yes.
It does. Okay. So
Yes.
that's really cool.
But there's your hardcore, like your real halal,
Yeah.
your traditional halal that will scoff at that and require the traditional head holder, neck extension, cut, and then shoot.
Yeah. I feel like you and me dotted a lot of I's and crossed a lot of T's. But I have to ask you, Lacey, we're called Keeping It Rural. And we always ask our guests, what do you do to keep it rural in your life?
I kayak down a river called the Skunk River. I don't know if you can get any more rural than that.
I would have to agree with you on that. Do you have a floating cooler with you? I mean, that would
I
just.
do.
Do
I
you?
do.
Okay,
And it's actually shaped like a submarine and it's yellow.
that is awesome. Where do you see your future from here? Do you enjoy what you do?
I do. I
Yeah.
know what I'm going to do when I grow up.
No. People ask
I
me
don't know.
too, and I'm just like, I'm still just doing it. But thank you so much for having this conversation with me because this is a tough conversation. And it's a conversation I think that people need to hear. I wish it was more talked about. I wish it wasn't so foo foo. And, I understand why we have to have humane conversations and there's controversy around it. But yeah, I wish people could be a lot more exposed to it. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this meet and greet, Lacey. Your story and Cargill's focus on animal welfare is super impressive and very, very interesting. And I love the fact that you worked up through the ranks. It's always fun to talk to kindred souls in the industry where we all come from and where we're all going. Where can people find more information if they're looking to learn more with Cargill?
It's right on the internet. Google Cargill Animal Welfare and it will pull right on out over to the left. You'll be able to click on beef and you'll get to see what it is that we do for animal welfare. And I'll send you to all of the links that we have to follow, regulations, BQA, things along those lines. Anything and everything you could ever need to know about beef animal welfare can be found on our website.
That is so awesome. Thank you for all the work you do, Lacey. I certainly learned so much from you and had an incredible conversation. I'm glad our listeners could join us for this important information that we've shared. Have a great rest of your summer and enjoy grilling season.
Thank you. You too.
It's not a party without you there. Follow Our Crazy on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to check out all episodes and extras at keepinitruralgirls.com.
That's all, folks.